On New Year's morning, while his wife stood at the stove making breakfast for their family, Ethan Brooks sat down at the kitchen table, folded his hands like he was about to close a business deal, and told her he wanted a divorce. He didn't whisper it. He didn't stammer. He said it the way a man cancels a subscription. Calm, decided, already done in his mind before the words ever left his mouth. He expected her to drop the spatula. He expected tears, maybe screaming, maybe begging. Amara Brooks turned around, looked at her husband of 11 years, and smiled. If that were you, what would you have done? If this kind of story speaks to something deep in your chest, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the stories we tell on this channel don't just entertain. They remind you of something you already know, that the people who underestimate you are writing the first chapter of their own downfall. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels, and if it moves you, hit that like button. Now, let's go back to that kitchen, because what happened next changed everything. The eggs were almost done. That's what Amara remembered later. Not the words her husband used, not the expression on his face, not even the sound of her own heartbeat in that moment. She remembered the eggs. She had cracked 4 of them into the pan, added a pinch of salt the way her mother taught her, and she was just about to lower the heat when Ethan sat down behind her and said the thing he said. "I want a divorce, Amara." 6 words, 11 years. 2 children asleep upstairs. She didn't drop the spatula. She didn't spin around in shock. She finished lowering the heat first, because the eggs would burn if she didn't. And then she turned to face him. Ethan was dressed already. That struck her as odd, even in that suspended moment. It was barely past 7 in the morning on New Year's Day, and her husband was sitting at their kitchen table in pressed slacks and a button-down shirt, his hair freshly cut, his jaw shaved clean. He looked like a man who had somewhere important to be. "Okay," she said. That was it. Just, okay. He blinked. Whatever he had rehearsed, whatever scenario had played out in his head on the drive home the night before, this was not it. "Okay?" he repeated. "I heard you, Ethan." She turned back to the stove. "Breakfast will be ready in a few minutes if you want to eat before you leave." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Amara had ever heard in her own kitchen. She could feel him staring at the back of her head like he was trying to solve an equation that kept giving him the wrong answer. She plated the eggs, added 2 strips of turkey bacon on the side, and set his portion on the counter without looking at him again. That's... He stopped, started over. "Amara, I just told you I want a divorce." "I know what you said, and you're just making breakfast." "The children are going to wake up hungry, Ethan. That doesn't stop because you've made a decision." He pushed back from the table slightly. She heard the chair legs scrape against the tile floor, and something about that sound, small, ordinary, domestic, made her throat tighten for exactly 1 second. Just one. Then she swallowed it down and reached for the orange juice. What Ethan could not have known in that moment, what he had no possible way of understanding as he sat there in his pressed slacks, watching his wife pour juice into 2 small cups with cartoon animals on them, was that Amara Brooks had already grieved this marriage. She had already cried every tear she had for it. She had already lain awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling and bargaining with herself and breaking down and putting herself back together. And she had done all of that alone, in silence, over the course of 3 months, while sleeping 6 inches away from the man who had already left her in every way that mattered. She had just been waiting for him to say it out loud. It started on a Tuesday in October. Ethan had left his phone on the bathroom counter before his shower, something he almost never did. He was usually religious about keeping it with him, something Amara had noticed with the kind of low-grade awareness a woman accumulates over years of paying attention to the small shifts in her husband's behavior. She hadn't said anything about it. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself that 11 years of marriage and 2 kids and a mortgage and a business they had helped each other build from nothing meant that she knew this man. She had picked up his phone to move it off the wet counter. The screen lit up with a message preview. She would not repeat the words later, not even to herself. But she read them. She stood there in her bathroom with her husband's phone in her hand and water running in the shower 4 feet away, and she read every word of what that woman had sent him. And then, because the phone was already unlocked, she read the thread above it too. All of it, weeks of it. By the time Ethan turned off the water, Amara had set the phone exactly where she found it, walked to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and pressed both palms flat against her thighs to stop her hands from shaking. She did not confront him that night. She did not confront him the next day, or the week after, or the month after that. People who knew Amara, really knew her, not the polished version she presented at Ethan's company dinners, understood that she was not a woman who acted from the raw wound of an emotion. Her mother used to say she came out of the womb already thinking 3 steps ahead. It was the quality that made her exceptional at architecture. The ability to see the whole structure before a single beam was placed, to understand load and pressure and the exact points where something would fail. She applied that same mind to her marriage in the weeks after October. She applied it coldly, methodically, without a single conversation that could warn Ethan she already knew. While he was at work, she began organizing. Her inheritance from her grandmother, money Ethan had always dismissed as a nice cushion, but not serious capital, was quietly moved. Her freelance projects, the small architecture commissions she had taken on during the pandemic, when his business was struggling and they needed the supplemental income, had never fully stopped. She had simply never made them a topic of dinner conversation. In November, she opened a business account under her maiden name, Brooks Okafor Architectural Design. In December, she signed 2 contracts. She also called a lawyer. Just once, quietly, from her car during her lunch break. 45 minutes. She took notes on her phone in a folder she labeled grocery lists. So when Ethan sat down at her kitchen table on New Year's morning in his pressed shirt and told her he wanted a divorce, Amara was not standing at that stove as a woman whose world was ending. She was standing there as a woman who had already built a new one. "I've thought about this a lot," Ethan said. He was using his business voice now. Measured, reasonable, the voice he used when he wanted to appear like the most rational person in the room. "I don't think it's good for either of us to keep going the way we've been going. We've been distant for a long time." Amara set 2 plates on the counter. "I just think," he paused. "I think we want different things now." She picked up the orange juice pitcher and topped off a glass. "Do you want some juice?" "Amara." "Ethan." She finally looked at him fully. Not with fury, not with tears, not with any of the emotions he had probably steeled himself against. Just directly. "You want a divorce. I'm agreeing to it. What exactly is the problem?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "What about the kids?" he finally managed. And here was where Amara had to be careful, because this was the part that had kept her awake more than anything else. Not the marriage. Not her own pain. The children. Maya, who was 8 and had her father's stubborn chin and her mother's habit of narrating everything she observed. And Jonah, who was 5 and still sometimes climbed into their bed at 6 in the morning and pressed his cold little feet against whoever was closest. She had made her calculations here too. "You can have primary custody," she said. The silence this time was different. It had weight to it. Ethan stared at her. "What?" "You heard me. Amara, why would you—" He was genuinely off balance now, the business voice gone. "You love those kids more than anything." "Which is exactly why I'm saying it." She met his eyes and held them. "You're going to do what you're going to do, Ethan. I'm not going to stand here and fight you for custody and put Maya and Jonah in the middle of something ugly. If you want to be the primary parent, I'll support that. I'll still be their mother. I'll still be there for everything that matters." She paused. "Can you say the same?" He didn't answer. She hadn't expected him to. What she had not told him, what she had no intention of telling him, not yet, not for a long time, was that she knew exactly what his life was about to look like. She knew the woman he was planning to go to. She knew because she had spent 3 months paying attention in the way a woman who has been betrayed pays attention, with complete focus and absolutely nothing to lose. Ethan's assistant, a 28-year-old named Vanessa Cole, had been with his company for 2 years. She was quick, organized, and almost preternaturally good at making herself indispensable to the people around her. Ethan believed she was in love with him. He believed she had walked into his life at the exact moment when his marriage felt stale and his business felt routine, and he needed to feel, just for once, like the most interesting man in the room. What Amara had discovered, through careful, patient observation of the financial documents. Ethan sometimes left open on the home computer, through the receipts she had quietly photographed over weeks, through a single conversation with Ethan's business partner Marcus that Ethan didn't know she'd had, was that Vanessa Cole was stealing from his company. Not petty theft, not padding expenses, systematic, deliberate, substantial embezzlement. And Amara had done nothing about it. She had documented it. She had a folder on her laptop, labeled, organized, time-stamped, and she had done nothing with it because the timing was not right. Because the right information released at the wrong moment was just noise. But the right information held until the precise moment it would do the most damage. That was something else entirely. That was architecture. You had to know where the load-bearing walls were before you knew which ones to remove. When she heard the children starting to move upstairs, the thud of small feet, the creak of Jonah's bedroom door, she turned back to the counter and began cutting fruit. "You should eat something before you go," she said. "I'm making the kids' plates." Ethan sat at the table for another moment, looking at his wife's back, and she could feel him trying to understand something that was not yet available to him. He was a smart man. She had always given him credit for that, but he had spent so long believing that he was the one with the vision, the one taking the risks, the one building something, that he had stopped noticing that the woman he shared a bed with had been building something too. He picked up the fork she had set out for him. He ate. Maya came downstairs first, her hair in the lopsided braid she'd done herself the night before, wearing a sweater that was on backwards. She climbed into her chair and immediately began reorganizing the items on the table with the seriousness of a child who had decided this was her job. "Happy New Year," she said, to no one in particular. "Happy New Year, baby," Amara said. Jonah appeared at the bottom of the stairs a minute later, dragging a stuffed rabbit by one ear and looking deeply uncertain about whether he was ready to be awake. He walked directly to Amara and put his arms around her legs without saying anything. She reached down and touched the top of his head. Ethan watched all of this. She didn't look at him, but she felt him watching, felt him recalculating something, or trying to. The problem was that the equation he was working with had the wrong variables. He was still solving for the Amara he thought he knew, the one who would crumble, the one who needed him to be whole. He had stopped learning her a long time ago. After breakfast, he helped clear the plates. She noticed that, small and maybe involuntary, that last reach for normalcy. And then he went upstairs for a while. When he came back down, he had a bag with him. Not packed dramatically, not overstuffed with everything he owned, just a bag. A few days' worth of things. He kissed both children. Maya barely looked up from the puzzle she'd started. Jonah hugged his legs so fiercely that Ethan had to physically peel him loose, and something crossed his husband's face in that moment that Amara recognized. Not quite regret, but the shadow of a thing that would become regret later, when it was too late for the shape of it to matter. At the front door he paused. "Amara." He said her name the way he used to say it, a long time ago, like it meant something specific that only he knew. "I didn't expect—" "I know," she said. "Are you—" "Ethan." She said it gently but firmly. "The way you close a door that you intend to stay closed. Have a safe drive." He stood there for one more breath. Then he picked up his bag and walked out. She listened to the car start in the driveway. She listened to it back out. She listened to the sound of it fading down their quiet suburban street until there was nothing left of it. Then she went back to the kitchen, washed the breakfast dishes, and called her lawyer. "Happy New Year," she said when the woman picked up. "We can start moving forward." She did not cry. Not that morning, not that afternoon. There would be a night, about 2 weeks later, when Maya said something innocent about wishing Daddy would come to dinner, and Amara would excuse herself to the bathroom and sit on the edge of the tub and let herself feel the full weight of what had been broken. She would give herself exactly 12 minutes. She would cry hard, the kind of crying that makes your whole chest ache. And then she would wash her face, go back out, and finish helping her daughter with her homework. But on New Year's morning, she was steady. She had always been steady. It was just that Ethan had mistaken her steadiness for softness, had mistaken her patience for passivity, her silence for acceptance, her willingness to hold the household together while he built his empire for a lack of ambition of her own. He had looked at a woman who was quietly designing the future and seen only someone who was happy to stay in the background. He would learn. They all did, eventually. She stood at the kitchen window and watched the street outside, empty, still, everyone sleeping off the night before. The neighborhood looked exactly as it always had. The same houses, the same bare trees, the same cold January light making everything look a little more honest than it did in other seasons. She thought about the folder on her laptop. She thought about Vanessa Cole. She thought about Ethan sitting in his car somewhere right now, probably already calling her, probably already feeling the first clean rush of a man who believes he has escaped. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. She turned off the kitchen light and went to find her children. The call she made to her lawyer on New Year's morning lasted 43 minutes. Amara sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad in front of her and a pen in her hand, and she took notes in the same methodical handwriting she used for structural blueprints. Clean, precise, nothing wasted. Her lawyer, a woman named Patricia Wen, who had built her family law practice over 22 years and did not believe in softening things unnecessarily, walked her through the timeline they had already discussed in December. "You're sure about the custody arrangement?" Patricia asked. "For now," Amara said. "Let him believe he has control over that. It costs me nothing to let him think he won something." There was a brief pause on the other end. "You understand that primary custody with him means the children are in that household." "I understand. I also understand that Ethan Brooks is a man who has never once been solely responsible for school pickups, pediatric appointments, or what his children eat for dinner on a Tuesday. Give him 6 weeks." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, "All right, I'll file the initial paperwork this week." After she hung up, Amara sat at that table for a long time without moving. The house was quiet in the way houses only get after something large and irreversible has happened. A specific silence, almost pressurized, like the air itself was holding its breath. Jonah had fallen asleep on the couch with his rabbit. Maya was in her room arranging things, the way she did when she was processing something she didn't have words for yet. Amara looked at the empty chair across from her, the one Ethan had sat in that morning. The cushion was still slightly depressed from his weight. She reached over and straightened it. Then she opened her laptop. She had work to do. The first 2 weeks of January moved with the strange double quality of time during a crisis. Each individual hour felt enormous and exhausting, but when she looked back from a Friday, the whole week seemed to have collapsed into a single gray blur. Ethan texted occasionally. Practical things. Where did she keep the pediatric insurance cards? What was Jonah's allergy medication called? Could she confirm the date of Maya's next parent-teacher conference? Amara answered each message within a reasonable amount of time, in complete sentences, with no detectable emotion. He had moved into Vanessa's apartment, a 2-bedroom in the newer part of downtown, the kind of building that had a gym on the second floor and a rooftop terrace that nobody actually used. Amara knew the address because Ethan had listed it on a form the school required when they were notified of a parent's change of address. She had filed it without comment. What Ethan did not know was that Amara also knew the building's management company. She had designed a mixed-use property for them 4 years earlier, one of the last major projects she'd completed before Ethan's business expansion had demanded more of her administrative attention at home. The project manager she'd worked with, a meticulous Haitian-American man named Darnell Pierre, had sent her a bottle of wine and a handwritten card when the building won a regional design award. They had stayed loosely in touch. She was not using that connection. Not yet. She didn't need to. She was simply aware of it the way you're aware of a door that isn't locked. It was Marcus Webb who called her first. Marcus was Ethan's business partner, had been for 7 years since before the company was anything more than a shared office space, and 2 men with a whiteboard full of ideas. He and Ethan had grown up in different worlds, but found each other in the grinding middle years of building something from nothing, and for a long time their partnership had been one of those rare things, genuinely complementary. Ethan was the vision man. Marcus was the one who made sure the vision didn't bankrupt them. He called on a Thursday evening, 11 days into the new year. "Amara." His voice had something careful in it, something that was trying not to alarm her before he'd established what he needed to say. "You got a minute?" "Of course, Marcus. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight, because I don't have time to dance around things right now." "When have I ever danced around things?" He exhaled. "Did Ethan tell you anything about the Q4 accounts, the development fund for the Hargrove project?" She set down what she was holding. "No, why?" "Because there's a discrepancy. A significant one." He stopped. "I'm talking about 40-some thousand dollars, Amara. Maybe more. I'm still pulling numbers." She was very still. "Have you talked to Ethan?" "Tried to. He's—" Marcus stopped again, and she could hear the effort it was costing him to stay measured. "He's telling me I'm looking at it wrong, that the transfers were authorized, That I need to trust his read on it. And do you? Silence. Marcus? I've trusted his read for 7 years, he said. But this doesn't look like a bookkeeping error. This looks like money walking out the door with somewhere specific to go. Amara pressed her thumbnail against her palm and held it there. She knew. She had known since November. She had documentation, transfers, dates, amounts, a paper trail that anyone with basic forensic accounting knowledge could follow. She had built that folder carefully, cross-referencing what she found with public records, and the fragments of information Marcus himself had dropped in casual conversation over the years without realizing what he was telling her. Have you contacted your accountant? She asked. I have a meeting Monday. I wanted to talk to you first. He paused. Because you're smart, Amara. You always saw things Ethan didn't, and right now Ethan he's not seeing clearly. No, she agreed. He's not. Is there anything you can tell me? She thought about the folder on her laptop. She thought about what releasing that information now would do. To Marcus, to the company, to Ethan, to the timeline she had so carefully laid out in her head. I think you should trust what your accountant tells you on Monday, she said, and I think you should document everything from here forward. Every conversation, every decision, every transaction. Keep your own records, separate from the company system. A beat of silence. You already know something, Marcus said. I know that men who are not thinking clearly make expensive decisions, she said carefully. And I know you've worked too hard to let someone else's bad judgment take you down with it. Protect yourself, Marcus. She heard him breathe out slowly. All right, he said. All right. After she hung up, she sat for a long time without turning the lights on. The room went dark around her gradually. She didn't move. She was not a cruel woman. She wanted to be clear about that, even in the private courtroom of her own mind. She was not sitting in the dark enjoying the thought of Ethan's suffering. What she felt was more complicated than cruelty and less satisfying than revenge. It was something closer to the cold, precise awareness of someone who has already absorbed the worst of a blow and is now simply watching the physics of it complete themselves. She had not caused any of this. She had only declined to stop it. Across town, in a 2-bedroom apartment with a rooftop terrace nobody used, Ethan Brooks was learning what it meant to live in the version of his life he had chosen. Vanessa Cole was not what he had imagined she would be. That was the thought that kept surfacing in the first weeks of January, rising up at inconvenient moments, in the shower, driving to the office, lying awake at 2 in the morning, staring at a ceiling that was not his ceiling. He pushed it back down each time. He told himself it was adjustment. He told himself it took time for 2 people to find their rhythm in a shared space, that it had taken years for him and Amara to develop the domestic ease they'd built together. He was comparing the rough beginning of something new against the polished surface of something that had had 11 years to sand down its edges. He told himself a lot of things in those early weeks. Vanessa didn't cook. He had known this in an abstract way. They'd never discussed it directly, but the relationship had existed entirely in restaurants and hotel rooms and the carefully managed atmosphere of the office, where she was composed and bright and always smelled faintly of something expensive. In a shared apartment, the reality was that she ate takeout containers standing at the kitchen counter and left them on the counter afterward, and when he mentioned it once, lightly, she looked at him with an expression that was not quite hostility but was adjacent to it. I'm not your housekeeper, Ethan. I wasn't suggesting because I've seen how that goes. I'm not becoming your Amara. He hadn't said anything else about it. The children came the second weekend of January, the arrangement being that they would spend alternating weekends with Amara and with him during the initial period before the formal custody schedule was finalized. He had told Vanessa about the weekend 2 weeks in advance. She had nodded and said, fine, fine, of course. She understood they had children. Maya arrived with a backpack and an expression that Ethan recognized immediately as her mother's face on a smaller and more openly suspicious version. She stood in the middle of Vanessa's living room and turned in a slow circle, looking at everything, saying nothing. Jonah held his rabbit and pressed himself against Ethan's leg. Vanessa emerged from the bedroom in expensive athleisure wear, her smile the one she used at office functions, bright and calibrated and not reaching her eyes. Hey guys, she said. Maya looked at her. You're the reason my dad left. The silence that followed was spectacular. Maya, Ethan started. That's what Grandma said. Maya's voice was matter-of-fact, the way children are matter-of-fact about devastating things. She said Daddy made a bad choice, and left our family for another woman. Vanessa's smile didn't fall exactly. It more recalculated. Her eyes moved to Ethan with an expression that, if he'd been paying attention, would have told him something important about what the next several months were going to look like. Your grandma sounds like a real piece of work, Vanessa said lightly, to no one in particular, and walked back toward the bedroom. Ethan spent that entire weekend managing the gap between his children's obvious discomfort and Vanessa's increasingly thin patience. By Sunday morning, when he was making the children breakfast, cereal, because the refrigerator had almost nothing useful in it, Vanessa appeared in the kitchen doorway and said, quietly enough that the children couldn't hear from the living room, "How long is this going to be like this?" "What do you mean?" "I mean this." She gestured vaguely at the apartment, at the small shoes lined up by the door, at the stuffed rabbit on her couch. "Every other weekend, because I didn't sign up for—" "They're my kids, Vanessa. I know they're your kids." Her voice stayed low, but the edge in it sharpened. "I'm just asking what this looks like going forward, because it's a lot more concrete than I expected." He stared at her. "What did you think it would look like?" She looked away. "I don't know. Something more manageable." He turned back to the cereal bowls and didn't respond, but something shifted in his chest in that moment, something small and quiet that he didn't want to look at directly. The first hairline crack in the version of the future he had constructed in his head. Back in the other half of the city, Amara was having a different kind of weekend. Her mother, Claudette Okafor, had come over Saturday morning with a car full of groceries and the particular energy of a woman who expressed love primarily through feeding people and asking pointed questions. She was 61, small, the kind of beautiful that age makes more rather than less, and she did not believe in wasting time on anything that wasn't worth her energy. She had opinions about Ethan. "You're not sad enough," she said, standing at Amara's stove with a wooden spoon. "Mama, I'm not saying you should be crying on the floor. I'm saying I'm watching you, and I don't see a woman who's grieving. I see a woman with a plan, and I've known you long enough to find that a little unnerving." "I'm fine." "You're more than fine. That's what concerns me." Her mother turned to look at her. "Did you know before he told you?" Amara was quiet for a beat too long. Claudette turned back to the stove. "Lord have mercy." I didn't say anything. You don't have to. I know your face." She stirred something with more force than necessary. "How long?" 3 months. Her mother absorbed this. The wooden spoon kept moving. "And in those 3 months you did what?" "Prepared." Claudette was silent for a moment. Then she made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. "You are my child," she said. "God help you, but you are absolutely my child." By the 3rd week of January, Amara's business had its first new client under the Brooks Okafor name, a mid-sized restaurant group looking to redesign 3 locations across the city. It wasn't the kind of commission that made the news. It was the kind that paid the bills, established the portfolio, and built the kind of professional reputation that compounded quietly over time. She worked on it in the evenings after the children were in bed, at the kitchen table with her laptop and her drawing software, and a cup of tea that usually went cold before she remembered to drink it. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. The cruel irony of the past several years was that she had spent them making herself smaller to fit inside the shape of Ethan's life, attending his events, managing his household, moderating her own professional ambitions to accommodate his schedule. She had told herself it was temporary. She had told herself that once the business stabilized, once the kids were older, once things settled, but things never settle. Things just keep moving. You either move with them, or you wake up one day and realize you've been standing still for years. She was not standing still anymore. In the 2nd week of February, Marcus Webb called his accountant. The accountant called an auditing firm. The auditing firm sent 2 people to the offices of Brooks Webb Development on a gray Tuesday morning, and by noon the company's shared financial accounts had been placed under formal review. Ethan found out when Marcus texted him. "We need to talk, now, not the office." They met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the building, because neither of them wanted to have this conversation somewhere with windows that faced the street. Marcus got there first, was already sitting with both hands wrapped around a cup he wasn't drinking from when Ethan came through the door. "Tell me what you did," Marcus said, before Ethan had fully sat down. "Excuse me?" "The Hargrove Fund, the Park Street transfers. The equipment procurement invoices from October and November, that nobody seems to be able to match to any actual equipment. Marcus kept his voice flat, controlled, but his jaw was working. Tell me what happened. Ethan set his jaw. I already told you. Those were authorized. Authorized by who? Because I've been looking at the signature trails, and some of those approvals have your name on them, but the transfer instructions are routing to accounts I don't recognize. So either you made a series of decisions without telling me, which would be a fundamental violation of our partnership agreement, or somebody used your credentials to route money that isn't where it should be. He leaned forward slightly. Which is it? Ethan's face did something complicated. You're implying that... I'm not implying anything. I'm asking you directly, as your partner of 7 years, what happened to approximately $63,000. The number landed between them like something physical. 63,000. It was higher than Ethan had thought. He had been aware, peripherally, in the way that a man is aware of things he doesn't want to fully examine, that some of Vanessa's purchases had been running through company accounts. She had explained it to him once, efficiently, using the language of business reimbursements and client entertainment expenses. He had not asked follow-up questions. He had not wanted to ask follow-up questions. Marcus, don't. Marcus's voice dropped to something very quiet. Don't manage me. We've been partners too long for you to try to manage me. Ethan looked at the table. I think there may have been some errors in how certain expenses were categorized. Errors. Categorization issues. I'll look into it. The auditors are already looking into it, Ethan. That ship has left. Marcus sat back. His face was tired, deeply tired, in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Tell me one thing, and I need you to be honest with me, because we have built something together and I am not going to watch it burn down because you couldn't be honest with me. Is Vanessa Cole involved in this? The hesitation was barely 2 seconds long, but Marcus saw it. He closed his eyes briefly. Marcus, we're done talking about it for now. He stood up, picked up his cup, didn't drink from it. The lawyers will be in touch. He walked out of the coffee shop without looking back, and Ethan sat alone at the table watching him go, and something that had been suspended for a long time, some counterweight, some critical beam in the structure of his life, began, slowly, to give. He drove back to the apartment. Vanessa was there, which surprised him. She usually spent the afternoon at the office, but she had said something that morning about working from home. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop, wearing the oversized cardigan she'd had on all week, and she looked up when he came in. He stood in the middle of the living room and looked at her. The auditors are reviewing the company accounts, he said. She didn't change expression. Okay. $63,000, Vanessa. Something moved across her face then, quick, barely visible, but he knew her well enough by now to read the micro-expressions she thought she was controlling. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't even fear, exactly. It was the expression of someone rapidly recalculating. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Stop. Ethan, stop. He said it with the voice he used when he was finished being reasonable, the one that came from somewhere below his chest. I need you to look me in the face right now and tell me whether you have been using company accounts for personal expenses. She looked him in the face. I reimbursed the company for everything, she said. Every single transaction was documented. That is not what the auditors are finding. Then the auditors are looking at incomplete information. She turned back to her laptop. I'm not having this conversation right now. You're not... He crossed the room in 3 steps and closed her laptop. Not hard, but definitively. She looked up at him with an expression that was no longer performing anything, that had dropped every calibration and was just cold. $63,000. Marcus knows, the auditors know. And you're sitting here telling me you documented everything? I want you to move your hand. Vanessa, I want you to move your hand off my laptop and take a step back before you do something neither of us can recover from. Her voice was very calm and very precise. I'm not the one who authorized those accounts, Ethan. You are. Your signature is on those approvals. Whatever the auditors find, they're going to find your name on it first. He stared at her. So I suggest, she continued, the calmness in her voice taking on something that was almost gentle, almost compassionate, and was neither, that before you come in here pointing fingers at me, you think very carefully about what your own exposure looks like. He stepped back. Not because she scared him. Not exactly. but because she was right about one thing. His name was on those approvals. He had signed things without fully reading them because she had put them in front of him at moments specifically calculated to minimize his attention. He saw it now, looking back. He saw the pattern of it, the architecture of it, and he felt the specific nausea of a man understanding that he has been used. He walked to the window and stood there for a long moment. The city outside was gray and ordinary, traffic moving, people living their lives. "I left my family for you," he said. It came out quieter than he intended, more honest. She didn't respond. "I want you to know that I understand what I did," he said. "I left my family for you." "Ethan." Her voice had shifted again, softer now, reaching for something more familiar. "You were unhappy. You told me that. I didn't make you leave. You made a choice." "You know what's funny?" He turned from the window. "That's exactly what Amara would say." Vanessa's expression flickered. "She'd say it was a choice," he continued. "Not a mistake, a choice. And she'd be right." He looked at the woman across the room, at the expensive cardigan, the calibrated expression, the laptop she'd reclosed as if nothing had happened. "The difference is that she wouldn't steal from me while she said it." He picked up his keys from the counter. "Where are you going?" He didn't answer her. He drove, without any particular destination, for almost an hour. The city moved past his windows, and he barely saw it. He was running a different kind of calculation now. Not forward, but backward, retracing the architecture of decisions he'd made over the last year, looking for the point where the load-bearing wall had failed. There were several candidates, but the one that kept surfacing, the one he couldn't drive past no matter how many blocks he covered, was the moment in his own kitchen on New Year's morning when he had told his wife he wanted a divorce. And she had smiled. He had thought, at the time, that the smile meant she didn't care, that it confirmed what he had told himself for months, that the marriage was hollow, that they had grown apart, that what he and Amara had together was obligation and habit dressed up as partnership. He understood now, in the gray interior of his car, with the city streaming past, that the smile had not meant she didn't care. It had meant she was already ahead of him. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He glanced at it without picking it up. It was a text from the school. Maya had told her teacher that she was having a hard time concentrating because there was a lot going on at home. The teacher was requesting a conference with both parents at the earliest opportunity. He set the phone face down and kept driving. Behind him, in the apartment he'd just left, Vanessa Cole opened her laptop again, pulled up a different browser window from the one she'd been using, and began moving money. She had been planning for contingencies longer than Ethan knew. That was the thing about Ethan Brooks. He was smart about the big picture and careless about the details, and details were exactly where Vanessa lived. She had documents of her own. She had narratives prepared. She had very carefully, over the past 2 months, constructed a version of events in which she had been following authorized instructions all along. She was not worried about the auditors. Not yet. What she had not accounted for was the folder on Amara Brooks's laptop, the one labeled with a date in October, organized with the quiet precision of an architect who understood that the difference between a structure that stands and one that collapses is almost always in the details that nobody thought to check. That folder existed, and the woman who had built it was not in a rush. Amara was at her drafting table when her phone buzzed with the school notification. She read it, set the phone down, and made a note on her legal pad to call the teacher in the morning. Then she picked up her pencil and went back to the elevation drawing she'd been working on. Clean lines, measured angles, everything in its precise and necessary place. Outside, January was becoming February, and the city was moving forward, the way cities do, indifferent to individual damage, carrying everyone along regardless of what they had lost or what they were about to lose. And on a shelf above Amara's drafting table, between a dog-eared copy of an architectural theory textbook and a framed photo of her children at the beach last summer, sat her closed laptop. Inside it, a folder. Inside the folder, 63,000 reasons why the worst was not yet over for Ethan Brooks, and why the woman he had dismissed on New Year's morning had never once needed him to know that she was. The folder had a name. Amara had titled it simply October. The month she found out, the month everything changed while nothing on the surface changed at all. Inside it were 47 documents, screenshots, PDF exports, photographs taken with her phone of her home computer screen, Transaction records she had reconstructed from fragments the way an archaeologist reconstructs a vessel from broken pieces, working not from what was whole, but from what remained. She had not opened it in 11 days. She opened it now. It was a Thursday evening in the second week of February, and the children were asleep, and the house was doing that pressurized silence again, the one she had started to recognize as the sound of her own life rearranging itself. She made herself a cup of tea, sat down at the kitchen table, and went through every document in the folder from the beginning, not because she had forgotten anything, because she needed to be certain she hadn't missed anything before she decided what to do next. She hadn't missed anything. The pattern was clear and it was damning, and it had Vanessa Cole's fingerprints on every transaction the way a person leaves fingerprints on everything they touch when they believe nobody is watching. The routing accounts, the invoice numbers that didn't match any vendor in the company's legitimate records, the timing of the transfers, always within 48 hours of a major project disbursement, always in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger automatic review. Whoever had set this up understood the system well enough to navigate its blind spots. The amount Marcus had named, $63,000, was conservative. Amara's count came to just over $81,000 across 14 months. She closed the laptop. She picked up her tea, found it had gone cold, and drank it anyway. The question was not whether to use what she had. She had always known she would use it. The question was when and how, and what sequence of events would follow from the moment she released it into the world. She had been thinking about this the way she thought about structural engineering, not just the immediate effect of a load-bearing change, but the cascade. What falls when this wall comes down? What is still standing after? She picked up her phone and called Patricia Wen. It was 9:47 at night. Patricia answered on the third ring. "I need to send you something," Amara said without preamble. "Tonight." A pause. "How significant?" "Significant enough that I want it in your hands before anything else moves." "Send it." Another pause, shorter. "Are you all right?" Amara looked around her kitchen, at the children's drawings held to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like fruit, at the two small pairs of shoes by the back door, at the single coffee mug in the dish rack that was hers and only hers now. "I'm all right," she said. "I just need to make sure I'm doing this in the right order." She sent the folder at 9:52 p.m. What she did not know, in that precise moment, was that in a downtown apartment 14 blocks away, Vanessa Cole had spent the last 3 hours doing something that would change the order of everything. Vanessa was not a woman who panicked. She had built her entire professional identity on the appearance of composure, the ability to sit across a table from men who underestimated her and perform exactly the version of herself they needed to see, to feel comfortable handing her access, authority, trust. She was good at it. She had been good at it for a long time. But she was also practical in the specific way of someone who has always understood that every arrangement has a shelf life. And Ethan's silence when he came back to the apartment that night. He had returned around 10, said almost nothing, slept on his side of the bed with his back to her. That silence told her the shelf life on this particular arrangement was running out faster than she had planned for. She had contingencies. She always had contingencies. The one she activated at 11 o'clock on that Thursday night was the one she had hoped not to need. She called her brother. His name was Derek Cole, and he was 3 years older than Vanessa, and had spent most of his adult life doing work that existed in the spaces between what was legal and what wasn't. Not dramatically, not in any way that had ever resulted in an arrest, but in the chronic gray zone of a man who knew people and knew how to make problems either disappear or become someone else's problem. Vanessa had kept him at a careful distance during the Ethan years. She didn't want that world anywhere near the one she was building. Now she needed a specific thing from him, and she called him. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. She spoke quietly, with her bedroom door closed and Ethan asleep on the other side of it. When she hung up, she sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a moment, pressing her palms flat against her thighs, a gesture she did not know she shared with the woman her boyfriend had left. Then she lay down and closed her eyes and made herself breathe slowly until her heart rate came down. She was not panicking, she was adapting. The school conference was on a Friday morning. Both parents requested. Amara arrived first, as she almost always arrived first to things. She sat in a small chair across from Maya's teacher, a young woman named Ms. Pryor, who had the earnest, slightly overwhelmed energy of someone in her third year of teaching, who genuinely cared and had not yet learned to protect herself from how much she cared. She had prepared notes. She had a folder. Ethan came in 4 minutes late. He saw Amara sitting there, and something moved through his face that he smoothed over quickly. He took the chair beside her, not close enough that their arms would touch. "Thank you both for coming," Ms. Pryor said. Maya, the teacher explained, had been distracted, had been making comments in class that suggested she was processing a significant amount of emotional material at home. Nothing alarming in terms of behavior. Maya, still organized, still the child who alphabetized the classroom bookshelf during free reading. But she had started drawing pictures that were notably different from her previous work. Ms. Pryor produced one from the folder. It showed 2 houses side by side, with a figure standing between them. The figure was small and had been drawn in heavy, repeated pencil strokes, the kind of pressure a child applies when they are feeling something with more intensity than they have vocabulary for. "She told me," Ms. Pryor said carefully, "that she doesn't know which house to be happy in." Amara looked at the drawing. Ethan looked at the drawing. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "She's 8, Amara said finally, and her voice was steady. "She's going to need some time." "We both," Ethan started, and then stopped and started again. "We're both committed to making sure she's okay." Ms. Pryor nodded, clearly relieved they weren't going to make this worse in front of her. She made gentle recommendations. A counselor. Consistent routines. The children needed to know that both parents were stable. Stable. Amara looked at the drawing one more time before Ms. Pryor returned it to her folder. The small figure standing between 2 houses, heavy pencil strokes. Her daughter, trying to draw her way through something she didn't have the words for. She stood up, shook Ms. Pryor's hand, and walked into the hallway. Ethan caught up with her at the door to the parking lot. "Amara." She stopped. Turned. "I want to see them more," he said. "The every other weekend thing. It's not enough. For them or for me." She studied his face. He looked worse than he had on New Year's morning, thinner, with the particular gauntness of a man who had stopped sleeping well. His eyes had something in them that she recognized as the beginning of actual reckoning, not performance, not the managed emotion of a man who thought he was losing a negotiation, something more honest than that. "Talk to Patricia," she said. "If you want to adjust the schedule, do it through the lawyers. Can't we just—" He stopped. "Can't we handle something ourselves, without making everything a legal transaction?" "We could have handled a lot of things ourselves, Ethan. We're past that." She pushed through the door. He didn't follow her. In the parking lot, sitting in her car with her hands on the wheel before she started the engine, she let herself feel it for exactly 30 seconds. The image of Maya's drawing, the small figure with the heavy lines, the 2 houses, the question her daughter couldn't speak out loud. She felt it the way you feel something you can't do anything about, completely, without filtering, and then you put it somewhere that doesn't interfere with your ability to function. She started the engine. She had a 10 o'clock call with a client about the restaurant redesign. She drove. The auditing firm's formal findings arrived at Brooks Webb Development on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of February. Marcus Webb received them first, as was technically appropriate given that he had initiated the review. He sat in his office with the door closed and read through 42 pages of documented irregularities, cross-referenced transactions, and flagged accounts. Then he called his lawyer. Then he called the police. He did not call Ethan. The call Ethan received came from a detective named Greer, a compact, unreadable man who introduced himself with the specific flat courtesy of someone who has spent years delivering information that ruins people's mornings. He asked Ethan if he could come in and speak with him about some business matters. He used the word voluntary. He used the word routine. He used these words in the practiced way of someone who understood their specific effect on the person hearing them. Ethan agreed to come in Thursday morning. He hung up the phone and sat in his car in the parking garage beneath his building for 11 minutes without moving. He was counting the minutes because he needed something to count, some way to make time feel measurable and therefore survivable. He called Vanessa. She didn't answer. He called her again. Voicemail. He drove home, to the apartment that still didn't feel like home, that felt like a place he was temporarily staying while the life he was supposed to be living got sorted out somewhere else. And she was not there. The apartment had a specific quality of emptiness that told him she had not just stepped out. He looked in the bedroom, the closet. Her shoes were missing. The collection of them that lived on a rack by the wall, the heels and the expensive sneakers, and the ankle boots she'd worn on their first real date outside of work. Gone. He stood in the closet doorway. The hangers were pushed to one side, clustered, the way they bunch up when a section of clothes has been removed quickly. Her toiletries were gone from the bathroom, the charger she kept on her nightstand, the soft gray blanket she'd brought from her previous apartment that she claimed helped her sleep. He walked back into the living room and stood there. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He opened it. It was a photograph. He looked at it for a long time. Then he sat down on the couch, very slowly, like a building settling. The photograph showed a wire transfer confirmation. It was dated that morning at 6:14 a.m., while he was still in bed on the other side of the closed bedroom door. The destination account was one he didn't recognize. The amount was $44,000, pulled from the last healthy reserve account he had personally maintained separate from the company, an account whose information he had shared with Vanessa 6 months ago, when she handled a large contractor payment on his behalf. He had not thought about that moment in 6 months. He thought about it now with the retrospective clarity of a man examining the X-ray of a fracture he sustained before the pain started. The text from the unknown number had no accompanying message, just the photograph. He sat with it for a moment. Then he typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "Someone who thought you should see that before Thursday." He put the phone down on the cushion beside him and pressed both hands over his face. In the dark behind his palms, he could hear his own breathing, uneven, too fast. The sound of a man whose body was responding to information his mind hadn't fully processed yet. He lowered his hands. He picked up the phone and called his personal lawyer. Not the one who handled the business, his personal attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, who had helped him structure the original partnership agreement with Marcus 7 years ago, and who had, on 2 other occasions, helped him navigate situations that required careful handling. Gerald picked up on the second ring, heard the first 2 sentences of what Ethan said, and told him not to speak to the detective on Thursday without counsel present. "Am I a suspect?" Ethan asked. "Right now you're a person of interest," Gerald said, "which means you haven't been charged with anything, which means we have time to get in front of this. But Ethan, and I need you to hear me, I need you to tell me everything, everything. Not the version you tell Marcus, not the version you'd tell Amara. Everything." Ethan looked at the empty closet through the bedroom door, the pushed-together hangers. "She's gone," he said. "Who's gone?" "Vanessa. She took money from my personal account this morning, $44,000, and she's gone." Gerald was quiet for exactly 1 second. "When you say gone, I mean gone. Clothes, bags, everything. She's not here." Another second of quiet. "Okay. Listen to me very carefully. Do not touch anything in that apartment. Do not move, delete, or reorganize anything. Take photographs of the closet and the bathroom and any other areas where you can see her belongings have been removed. Right now, before you do anything else." "Gerald, right now, Ethan." He walked through the apartment with his phone, photographing the empty closet, the bare bathroom counter, the cord still plugged into the wall where her charger had been. He moved through it the way you move through a place you no longer recognize, a place that has revealed itself to be something other than what you thought it was, and the ordinary objects of it, the takeout containers he'd thrown away, the throw pillow she'd bought that he'd never liked, the coffee mug with a chip in the rim that was still sitting in the dish rack, had the surreal quality of artifacts from a version of his life that had just ceased to exist. His phone buzzed again while he was still on with Gerald. He glanced at the screen. A notification from the building's security app, the one that logged all keycard entries and exits. Someone had used the unit's access code at 6:03 a.m. He had been asleep. The log showed the front door opening and then the building exit 11 minutes later, 6:03 to 6:14. 11 minutes to take $44,000 and leave a life. He had been 11 minutes away from knowing. If he had woken up at 6:03 instead of 7:15, he would have been standing in the living room when she walked out. He tried to imagine what that conversation would have looked like and couldn't. He could not construct a version of it in which any outcome was better than the one he had. "Ethan," Gerald's voice in his ear, "are you still there?" "I'm here." "I need you to go somewhere else tonight. Not the apartment. A hotel, your brother's place, wherever. But not here. This space may be relevant to the investigation, and I don't want you contaminating it. My name is on the lease. I understand that. I'm asking you to trust me on this. Ethan stood in the middle of the living room for one more moment. He looked at the apartment that had represented 3 months ago the beginning of something new, the future he had chosen over the one he had. He picked up his bag from beside the couch. He had never fully unpacked it. He walked out. He drove for 20 minutes without knowing where he was going. Then he found himself on the exit that led to his old neighborhood, the one where his house still was. Amara's house now, technically. The one they were still negotiating the sale or transfer of through lawyers. He didn't stop there. He drove past it slowly, and the lights were on in the kitchen the way they always were in the evening, and through the window he could see the warm yellow of it, and that was all. He drove to a hotel. He sat on the edge of a hotel bed at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night, with his phone in his hand and the silence of an anonymous room around him, and he called his mother. She answered immediately, the way mothers answer when they're waiting for you to call. "I've done something terrible," he said. She didn't say anything right away. He could hear her breathing, could hear the television in the background of wherever she was, and then she turned it down and gave him her full attention the way she had always given him her full attention, and it destroyed him a little bit. "I know," she said. "You don't know all of it." "Tell me," he told her. He sat in a hotel room and told his mother what he had done. Not the curated version, not the version in which he was a dissatisfied husband who had made a difficult but understandable choice. He told her the real version, the affair, the deliberate choice to pursue it, the way he had treated Amara's calm as evidence of indifference rather than understanding it for what it was. The money, the apartment, the morning he had sat at his kitchen table in pressed slacks and said the thing he had said while she stood at the stove and didn't drop the spatula. His mother listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "What do you need from me right now?" "I don't know." "Do you need a place to stay?" "I have a hotel." "Do you need money?" "Not yet." He rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand. "I need to figure out how bad Thursday is going to be." "And Amara?" He leaned back against his headboard and stared at the ceiling. "She knew," he said. "She knew before I ever said anything. She had to have known." He paused. "She never said a word." "No," his mother said quietly. "She wouldn't." He didn't say anything. "Ethan." His mother's voice had that specific quality it got when she was about to tell him something she had been holding for a long time. "That woman has been holding your family together since before you even noticed it needed holding. And I love you. You are my child, and I love you without condition. But I watched you stop seeing her. I watched it happen over years. And I didn't say enough about it when I should have. Mama, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to make sure that the thing you're learning right now is the right thing." She paused. "What are you going to do?" He thought about Maya's drawing, the small figure between two houses, the heavy pencil lines, the question drawn in graphite because it couldn't be spoken out loud. "I'm going to get through Thursday," he said, "and then I'm going to figure out the rest." He hung up and lay on the hotel bed with his shoes still on and the light still burning and the city outside making its ordinary sounds through the window. On the other side of that city, in her kitchen with the warm yellow light and her children asleep and her laptop open to a set of structural drawings that were due at the end of the week, Amara's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Wen. "Documents received. We'll talk tomorrow." 2 things. First, someone sent this same material to the auditing firm tonight, not from you. Second, you need to be prepared. Things may move faster than we planned. Amara read it twice. Someone else had sent the folder. She sat with that for a moment, turning it over, testing it the way you test a joint in a structure by applying pressure and watching for movement. Someone who had access to the same information she had. Someone who had decided the time was now, without consulting her, without waiting for her measured and careful sequence of events. She typed back, "Do you know who?" Patricia's response came after a 2-minute gap. "Not yet, but whoever it was wanted the auditors to have it before the police interview on Thursday." Amara set the phone down on the table. She looked at the structural drawings on her screen without really seeing them. She was not angry. Not exactly. What she felt was the specific unease of an architect who has spent weeks calculating load distribution only to arrive at the site and find that someone else has already removed a wall. The right wall even, the one she had identified, but without the sequence of support she had planned to put in place first, without the careful preparation that would have kept the rest of the structure stable while that section came down. The wall was coming down on its own schedule now, not hers. She picked the phone back up, looked at Patricia's message again. Things may move faster than we planned. She typed back, "All right, what do I need to do differently?" She waited. Patricia's response came 3 minutes later. Nothing yet. "But Amara, if this goes where I think it's going, you're going to be called in as a witness, not to the affair, to the financial irregularities. Because of what you documented and when you documented it, the prosecution is going to want to know Patricia's full message came through at 11:47 p.m. Because of what you documented and when you documented it, the prosecution is going to want to know exactly how you came to have this information, how long you held it, and why you didn't report it earlier. That's not an accusation. That's a question a defense attorney will use. We need to be ready for it." Amara read it standing at her kitchen counter. Then she read again sitting down. She had spent 3 months building a structure so precise, so load-bearing in every critical joint, that she had allowed herself to believe she controlled the sequence of its collapse. She had been wrong about that. Not about the structure itself. About the sequence. Someone else had pulled the trigger. And now the building was coming down on its own timeline, and she was standing inside it. She typed back, "I'll be in your office at 8. She closed the laptop. She did not sleep well. She lay in her bed in the dark and ran through every document in the October folder from memory. Dates, amounts, transfer destinations. The gap between what she had found and what she could prove she hadn't caused. She was not guilty of anything except knowing too much and moving too slowly. She understood that. She also understood that in a courtroom, the distance between those two things could be made to look very small by someone whose job was to make it look that way. At 6 a.m. she was in the shower. At 6:45 she had the children fed and dressed, and at the neighbor's door, Mrs. Holloway, 64, retired teacher, the kind of woman who kept granola bars in her cabinet specifically for other people's children on short notice. At 7:15 Amara was in her car. At 7:58 she was sitting across from Patricia Wen in an office that smelled like coffee and organized urgency. Patricia did not waste time. "Walk me through October, every decision, every document. I want the timeline exact." Amara walked her through it, 40 minutes, no interruptions, the kind of accounting that only a person with a precise and honest memory can give. Patricia took notes by hand in a yellow legal pad, pressing hard enough that the impressions showed through to the next page. When Amara finished, Patricia set her pen down. "You held this for 3 months," she said. "It was not an accusation. It was a fact being examined." "Yes." "Why?" "Because releasing it before I was ready would have given Ethan time to construct a defense. It would have given Vanessa Cole time to run. I wanted the information to land at the moment when it would do the most complete damage to the people who had earned it and the least collateral damage to my children." Patricia looked at her for a long moment. "That answer is honest." "Yes." "A defense attorney is going to try to make it sound like you were using it as leverage, or that you were complicit in allowing the theft to continue. I was not complicit in anything. I know that. We're going to need to make sure 12 other people know it too, if this goes to trial." Patricia picked her pen back up. "Here's where we are. The auditors have the documents. The police have the auditor's report. Ethan Brooks has a meeting with a detective tomorrow morning that will almost certainly not remain voluntary. Vanessa Cole's whereabouts are currently unknown." She paused. "And you are about to become the most important witness in a criminal embezzlement case." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because your name is going to be in this, Amara. Not as a suspect, but it's going to be in it." Amara looked at her hands on the table. They were steady. She noted that with something that was not quite pride and not quite relief, just information. Her hands were steady. "Tell me what I need to do," she said. Thursday morning arrived with the particular gray flatness of a day that has decided not to pretend. Ethan sat in a conference room at Gerald Fitch's law office and did not eat the breakfast his attorney had ordered for him. He drank coffee. He looked at the table. He listened to Gerald explain for the second time what the next few hours were going to look like. The detective's name was Greer. He was bringing a colleague. This was no longer a voluntary conversation. The phrasing had shifted overnight when the auditing report landed on the right desk. Technically, Ethan could decline to speak without his attorney present, which he was exercising. Gerald would be in the room. They're going to want to know about your relationship with Vanessa Cole, Gerald said, both professional and personal. They're going to want account access information, authorization records, and your explanation for why your credentials appear on transfers you claim you didn't initiate. I didn't initiate them. I know. But your digital fingerprints are on them, which means someone with access to your credentials did. That points one of two directions. Either you did it, or someone very close to you did it using access you gave them. He paused. Which means we are going to have a very frank conversation about exactly how much professional and personal access you gave Vanessa Cole and when. Ethan put his coffee cup down. All of it, he said. I gave her all of it. Gerald looked at him. Not intentionally as, I didn't sit down and think, here, take all of my access credentials. It was gradual. She handled things for me. Payments, scheduling, account management. I gave her what she needed to do the job, and I didn't audit it because I trusted her. He stopped. Because I was sleeping with her. That's what I needed to hear, Gerald said. Not warmly, pragmatically. Now let me tell you how we're going to frame that. Detective Greer arrived at 9 sharp. His colleague was a woman named Solace, who took notes in a thin spiral notebook and had the quality of someone who was almost entirely without effect. Not cold exactly, just precisely calibrated, like an instrument that stays still so it can measure movement in other things. Greer sat across from Ethan and Gerald and placed a folder on the table between them. He did not open it immediately. He looked at Ethan for a moment with the flat patience of a man who has sat in this specific configuration many times. Mr. Brooks, he said, tell me about Vanessa Cole. Ethan told him. Gerald had coached him on this. Be complete. Be factual. Do not volunteer information. Not directly responsive to the question. Do not perform emotion in either direction. Ethan told the story of how he had met Vanessa, how she had come to work for the company, how their relationship had developed, how he had given her access to accounts and authorization to act on his behalf in business matters. Greer listened without changing expression. And the personal relationship, he said. When did that begin? Approximately 14 months ago. Was it ongoing at the time you became aware of the financial irregularities? Yes. Are you currently in a relationship with Ms. Cole? Ethan looked at the table for a half-second. She left the apartment we shared on Tuesday morning. I haven't spoken to her since. Greer wrote something. Solace wrote something. Are you aware of Ms. Cole's current whereabouts? No. Have you made any attempt to contact her? I called twice on Tuesday afternoon. She didn't answer. I haven't tried since. Greer nodded slowly. Then he opened the folder. He slid a document across the table. A transaction record, one of the wire transfers, with Ethan's credentials in the authorization field. Did you authorize this transfer? Ethan looked at it. At the date, the amount, the destination account. No. Your credentials are on it. I understand that. Can you explain how your credentials appear on a transaction you didn't authorize? Ms. Cole had access to my login information. I gave it to her over the course of our working relationship to facilitate account management. Greer looked at him steadily. You gave your business account login credentials to an employee. She was more than an employee. She was also the person those credentials were used to transfer money to accounts we haven't been able to identify yet. He paused. Does that concern you? Yes. Ethan met his eyes. It concerns me a great deal. Solace turned a page in her notebook. Greer reached back into the folder. He produced a second document and slid it across. The wire transfer confirmation from Ethan's personal account. The $44,000 from Tuesday morning. This account is not a company account, Greer said. No, it's personal. Ms. Cole also had access to this account? Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She executed a large contractor payment from it approximately 6 months ago at my request. I gave her access at that time, and did not revoke it. No. So to be clear, Greer leaned forward slightly. Ms. Cole had access to both your business accounts and your personal accounts. She has transferred a combined total of over $125,000 to unidentified accounts over a 14-month period, and she left your shared residence on the same morning that the last transfer occurred. He paused. And your position is that you had no knowledge of any of this until this week. That is my position, Ethan said, because it is the truth. The room was very quiet. Mr. Brooks, Greer said, and something in his tone shifted, not softer, but more direct. We received documentation 3 days ago, a significant amount of it, financial records, transaction histories, cross-referenced accounts, compiled documentation that someone had clearly been building for some time. He paused. Do you have any idea who might have put that together? Ethan went still. Gerald put a hand briefly on his arm. Professional reflex. Ethan felt it and understood its message and ignored it. My wife, he said. Greer looked at him. Your estranged wife compiled this documentation? I believe so, yes. And she sent it to the auditing firm? I don't know if she sent it. I know she had it. How do you know she had it? Ethan looked at the document in front of him, the transfer record with his credentials on it, clean and damning. Because Amara has always been the person in the room who saw things most clearly, he said, and because I stopped paying attention to that a long time ago. Greer sat back. He looked at Ethan for a long moment with an expression that was difficult to read precisely. Not sympathy, but something adjacent to it. The look of a man who has heard many variations of this particular story and finds none of them satisfying. We're going to need to speak with your wife, he said. She has counsel, Gerald said. We'll be in touch with counsel. The meeting ended at 11:20 a.m. Ethan walked out of Gerald Fitch's building into the gray February air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The city moved around him. Traffic, people, pigeons on a window ledge across the street going about the indifferent business of being pigeons. He had his coat on, but he could feel the cold anyway, in his chest, behind his sternum. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. The bank has frozen the company accounts pending investigation. I need you to know that I'm doing what I have to do to protect what we built. I'm sorry it came to this. Ethan read it twice. He typed back, I know. I'm sorry too. He did not know if Marcus read it. He put the phone in his pocket and started walking. Marcus Webb, meanwhile, was sitting in his own lawyer's office 3 miles away, working through the specific and exhausting process of legally disentangling himself from a partnership that had been, until approximately 3 weeks ago, one of the most important relationships of his professional life. His lawyer was talking. Marcus was listening with one part of his attention, and with the other part, he was doing what he had been doing for weeks, running back through 7 years of decisions, looking for the moments where he could have caught this earlier, identified the crack before it became a fracture. He kept landing on the same answer. He had trusted Ethan's read. He had trusted it specifically because Ethan had always been the better judge of people, quicker, more instinctive, more willing to bet on someone's potential before the evidence was fully in. That quality had served them well for years. It had also been, it turned out, the precise quality that Vanessa Cole had identified and exploited. Smart, Marcus thought. She had been very smart about which weakness to find. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from an unknown number. He didn't recognize the area code. You're going to want to check the Meridian account, not the company one. The LLC he set up in November. Marcus looked at his lawyer. Give me a minute. He stepped into the hallway and looked at his phone. He typed back. Who is this? The response came in under 10 seconds. Someone who was there for the conversation where it was decided you didn't need to know about it. He stood in the hallway of his lawyer's office with that text on his screen and felt something that was not quite anger and not quite devastation, but was made of both of them. An LLC. November. Without his knowledge. He went back into the office. I need you to run a search, he said. Ethan Brooks. Any new business entities filed in the last 6 months? His lawyer looked at him. All right. The search took 4 minutes. Brooks Meridian Holdings, LLC, filed November 14th, single member. Marcus sat with that for a long time. Then he called Greer. Across the city, in a mid-range hotel conference room that smelled like recycled air and old carpet, Amara Brooks sat across from Detective Greer and Detective Solis, with Patricia Wen beside her, and she was the most composed person in the room. Greer had given her the same flat courtesy he gave everyone. Patricia had instructed her, answer what's asked, no more, no editorializing, no performance in any direction. Amara didn't need the instruction. She had been preparing for this conversation in one form or another since October. Mrs. Brooks, Ms. Okafor Brooks is fine, she said, not correcting him aggressively, just precisely. Miss Okafor Brooks, when did you first become aware of financial irregularities in your husband's company? In October, approximately the 14th. How did you come to be aware? My husband left a computer logged into shared financial management software at home. I saw transaction records that didn't match what I knew of normal company operations. And what did you do with that information? I documented it. For what purpose? She looked at him steadily. I had just discovered that my husband was having an affair. I was simultaneously processing the likelihood that my marriage was ending and trying to understand the full financial picture before I spoke to a divorce attorney. The documentation was part of that process. Greer looked at her. You documented potential criminal activity as part of your divorce preparation. I documented financial irregularities that I didn't fully understand yet, she said. It took me time to understand what I was looking at. And once you understood it? I consulted my attorney. She did not look at Patricia but felt her presence beside her, steady. In December. You waited approximately 2 months between discovery and consulting an attorney. I was going through a significant personal crisis, she said. I was trying to understand what I was looking at before I brought it to anyone. I didn't want to make accusations I couldn't support. Is that the only reason you waited? She paused. 1 second, calibrated. I was also afraid, she said. It was the kind of truth that disarms people precisely because it is given without hesitation. I was afraid of what it would mean for my children if both their father's affair and his company's legal problems became public at the same time. I needed to understand the sequence. Greer wrote something. Did you send the documentation to the auditing firm? He asked. No. Flat, immediate, true. Do you know who did? I have a suspicion. She glanced at Patricia, who gave a barely perceptible nod. I believe it may have come from someone who had access to the same company records through a different route, but I don't have evidence of that. It's a supposition. Would you be willing to share that supposition? Through counsel, Patricia said. Greer nodded. He flipped to a different page in his folder. Ms. Okafor Brooks, are you aware of a business entity called Brooks Meridian Holdings, LLC? Amara went very still. Not visibly. Nothing that would show on camera, nothing that Solis's precise note-taking would capture. But something inside her shifted, a very small adjustment of pressure, the way a structure responds to a load it wasn't designed for. No, she said. I am not. Greer slid a document across the table. She looked at it. The filing date. November 14th. Her husband's name. Single member LLC. She looked at the listed address. A registered agent service, the kind used by people who wanted a layer of separation between themselves and the public record. She looked at it for 3 full seconds. Then she looked up at Greer. I was not aware of this, she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. Everything was steady, and underneath all of that steadiness, something was moving that she could not have named exactly. Not quite betrayal, because the capacity for being betrayed by Ethan Brooks had been substantially depleted since October. Something more like the recognition that the structure was even more compromised than she had calculated, that there were load-bearing walls she hadn't known about that had already been removed. Patricia put her hand on Amara's forearm. Light pressure, professional. I think my client needs a moment, Patricia said. Of course, Greer said. He and Solis stepped out. The door closed behind them and the room held a specific silence, and Amara sat with the document in front of her and the knowledge of what it might mean pressing down on her chest with a weight she had not anticipated. Did you know? Patricia asked quietly. No. Okay. Patricia's voice was even. Then we work with what we have. What does it mean for the divorce? If he was establishing a business entity in November and didn't disclose it, Patricia paused. It means his asset disclosure is incomplete, possibly fraudulently so, which changes the financial picture of the divorce settlement significantly. She paused again. In your favor. Amara looked at the filing date on the document. November 14th, she had filed the initial divorce paperwork on January 3rd. He had opened the LLC 6 weeks before the divorce papers were filed. He was hiding assets, she said. That's what this looks like, yes. She sat with that. Outside in the hallway, she could hear the muffled sound of movement, of the ordinary business of an ordinary building full of people going about ordinary things. Inside the conference room, it was very quiet. Amara, Patricia leaned forward slightly. I know this is a lot, but I need you focused right now because Greer is going to come back in that room and he's going to ask you about the Meridian LLC and whether you have any documentation that touches on it. And I need to know, is there anything in the October folder that mentions it? Amara ran through the folder in her memory. Every document, every transaction record, every cross-referenced account number. She did not have a photographic memory, but she had an architect's memory. Spatial, structural, everything in its precise location relative to everything else. No, she said. The account numbers I have don't match anything with Meridian in the name. But… She stopped. But what? There's a routing number. In one of the November transfers, I flagged it because it didn't match any of the company vendors I could identify. She looked at Patricia. If that routing number traces to the Meridian LLC, then your documentation is more comprehensive than either of us realized, Patricia said. And it means he wasn't just a victim of Vanessa Cole, Patricia said carefully. It means the picture is more complicated than that. The door opened. Greer and Solis came back in. Greer sat down with the practiced economy of a man who does not waste movement. He looked at Amara. She looked back at him. There's a routing number, she said before he could open the folder. In my documentation. November transaction, flagged as unidentified. I'd like my attorney to cross-reference it against the Meridian LLC filing before we continue. Greer looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly, but the recalibration of a man adjusting his assessment. That can be arranged, he said. Patricia was already writing. The cross-reference took 40 minutes and was done in the conference room, with Greer's colleague working a laptop, and Patricia reviewing the results over his shoulder. Amara sat with her hands flat on the table and did not look at the laptop screen and did not look at the clock on the wall. She looked at the middle distance and ran structural calculations in her head. The only thing that reliably kept her from feeling the full gravitational weight of what was collapsing around her. The routing number matched. One of the transfers in the October folder, $8,400, dated November 19th, 6 days after the Meridian LLC was filed, had gone to an account registered to Brooks Meridian Holdings, which meant the money that Vanessa Cole had been moving out of Brooks Web Development had not all gone to Vanessa Cole. Some of it had gone to Ethan. Patricia read the finding twice. Then she looked at Amara. Her expression was carefully controlled, professionally flat, but her eyes were doing something complicated. This changes your exposure significantly, she said quietly, and it changes his. Amara absorbed it. He knew, she said. It was not a question. Some of it, Patricia said. He knew about some of it. Maybe not all, but some. Greer across the table was on his phone. He spoke quietly into it for 30 seconds. Then he looked up. Ms. Okafor Brooks, he said, I'm going to ask you to remain available. We'll need a formal statement in the next 24 hours. Your documentation is going to be central to this. I understand. And I want to be very clear with you. He paused. Nothing in what we've reviewed today suggests you were involved in any financial misconduct. What it suggests is that you are a witness with unusually thorough documentation of events that are now the subject of a criminal investigation. He looked at her steadily. That's a significant position to be in. I'm aware, she said. She drove home in the gray afternoon. The city moved past her windows. She kept both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, the way her mother had taught her when she was 17 and learning to drive on winter roads. Keep your hands where they belong. Account for the ice before you're on it. She pulled into her driveway, sat in the car for a moment. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. How did it go? She typed back. It's more complicated than I planned for. 3 dots. Then, come for dinner. She looked at the house, the warm yellow light she'd left on in the entryway, the small shapes of her children's boots visible through the front window where Mrs. Holloway would be sitting with them. Her house. The one whose mortgage she had been making payments on since November from the Brooks Okafor business account. Her phone buzzed again. Not her mother this time. Ethan. She looked at his name on the screen for a full 3 seconds. Then she answered, Ethan. I know you were with Greer today. His voice was rough. Not crying. Something past crying. Something that had moved through that and come out the other side into a kind of hoarse honesty. I know what they found. Okay. Amara. A pause. Long enough that she could hear him breathing. I need you to know that I didn't plan it the way it looks. The Meridian account. I was trying to... Don't, she said. I need you to understand. Ethan. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. I have documentation with your routing number on it. My attorney has it. The detective has it. Anything you tell me right now, I am legally obligated to report, and anything I tell you could compromise my position as a witness. She paused. If you want to talk to someone, call Gerald. Silence on the line. Is that all I am to you now? He said. A legal liability? She looked through her windshield at her front door, at the warm light in the window, at the shape of Jonah's stuffed rabbit pressed against the glass from the inside, placed there by a 5-year-old who didn't know his mother was sitting in the driveway having the most consequential phone call of her divorce. You were never a liability to me, she said. That was always the problem. She ended the call. She sat for 1 more minute. Then she got out of the car, walked up the front steps, and opened her door. And the sounds of her children, Jonah's high voice narrating something to his rabbit, Maya's more measured tones correcting him about some matter of pressing importance, came rushing out to meet her, warm and ordinary and irreplaceable, and she stood in her own doorway and let it wash over her. Mom's home, Maya announced, not looking up from whatever she was doing. Jonah came around the corner at full speed with his rabbit and hit her at approximately knee height with the full commitment of a 5-year-old who had decided this was the appropriate velocity for greeting someone you love. She caught him. She held him. She pressed her face into the top of his head and breathed. 3 miles away, in a hotel room he was paying for with a card he wasn't sure still had available credit, Ethan Brooks sat on the edge of a bed and looked at his phone and understood, for the first time in a long and costly education, that the woman he had underestimated for the last year of his marriage had not been waiting for him to come back. She had been waiting for him to... He sat there until the hotel room went fully dark around him. He didn't turn on the light. He sat on the edge of the bed with his phone in his hand and the city doing its indifferent business outside the window, and he thought about what Amara had said. You were never a liability to me. That was always the problem. He turned it over the way you turn over something you found in the rubble of a structure you demolished yourself, carefully, because you're not sure yet whether it's evidence or just debris. Around 9 o'clock, he ordered room service, a sandwich he didn't want, because Gerald had told him to eat, and Gerald was currently the only person in his life whose instructions he had any reason to trust. He ate half of it. He drank water from the bathroom tap in a paper cup with a ridged edge that left an imprint on his lip. Then he lay down on the hotel bed with his shoes on and stared at the ceiling and made himself think about the Meridian LLC. He had opened it in November with the specific intention that he had told himself at the time was protective, a separate vehicle, a firewall, a way of keeping certain assets ring-fenced in case the company's debt situation deteriorated. He had told himself this was standard business practice, the kind of structural decision any sophisticated developer would make. He had not told Marcus because Marcus would have asked questions he didn't want to answer yet. He had not told Amara because by November their marriage existed only on paper and in the routines of the household they still technically shared. What he had not fully examined, in the clarity of this hotel room on this gray February night, was the money. The $8,400 that had come through on November 19th. He had known it came from company accounts. He had told himself it was a reimbursement, expenses he had run through the business for personal purposes that he was moving back to a personal vehicle. He had not asked Vanessa precisely which accounts the funds had originated from. He had not wanted to know precisely. That, Gerald would tell him later, was the legal crux of it. Not that he had stolen, but that he had created a structure designed to receive money without asking too hard about where the money was coming from. Willful ignorance, in a courtroom, has a specific legal weight. It is not innocence. It is not quite guilt. It lives in the expensive and uncomfortable territory between them. He picked up his phone and called Gerald at 9:45 p.m. I need to tell you something, he said when Gerald answered. All right. The Meridian account, the November transfer. I knew the money came from company accounts. Silence on Gerald's end, the particular silence of an attorney recalibrating. I thought I could justify as a reimbursement, Ethan continued. I was wrong. And I didn't look closely enough at where specifically the funds originated because I didn't want to have a conversation with Vanessa about it that would require me to admit I was paying attention. He stopped. I need you to know that before tomorrow. Yes, Gerald said quietly. You do. What does this mean? It means tomorrow is more complicated than we planned for. Gerald's voice had the careful flatness of a man working through implications in real time. But it also means that you walked into this conversation with me voluntarily at 9:45 at night before I had to find out another way. That matters. That's the beginning of something we can actually work with. Ethan let out a slow breath. Okay. Go to sleep, Ethan. I'll meet you at 8. He put the phone down. He did not go to sleep for a long time. But somewhere past midnight, in the anonymous dark of a hotel room in the city he had lived in for 20 years, and was only now beginning to see clearly, his body made the decision his mind couldn't, and he slept. The next 4 weeks moved with the accelerated and brutal logic of consequences. Gerald Fitch negotiated with Greer's team for 11 days. The picture that emerged was precisely as complicated as both sides had suspected. Vanessa Cole was the primary actor in the embezzlement, with documentation going back 14 months and total confirmed losses to Brooks Web Development of $94,000. Ethan Brooks had not orchestrated the scheme, but he had created a vehicle, the Meridian LLC, that had received $8,400 of misappropriated funds, and his unwillingness to examine the source of that transfer too closely was, in the legal language, Gerald and the prosecutor eventually agreed on, a form of constructive knowledge. The deal Gerald negotiated was not painless. It was designed not to be. Ethan would cooperate fully with the prosecution of Vanessa Cole. He would provide complete financial disclosure, including the Meridian LLC and all assets therein. He would make restitution to Brooks Web Development for the $8,400, plus applicable interest. In exchange, he would not face criminal charges. The prosecutor had assessed that the evidence of deliberate criminal intent on Ethan's part was insufficient to justify the cost and uncertainty of a trial, particularly when they had a much cleaner case against Vanessa. Marcus Webb received this information from his own lawyer on a Tuesday morning and sat with it in his office. The office that had been their shared space for 7 years, that still had a whiteboard in the corner with a faded diagram from some planning session 2 years ago that neither of them had ever fully erased, and felt the specific grief of a person losing something they had not known was already gone. He signed the partnership dissolution papers on March 3rd. Brooks Web Development ceased to exist as a legal entity on March 17th. Vanessa Cole was located on April 2nd. She had moved through 3 cities in 6 weeks using a combination of her own identity and what turned out to be a relatively unsophisticated alias, a credit card in her cousin's name, a prepaid phone, a series of short-term rentals booked through apps. She was in Phoenix, in a furnished studio apartment near a light rail stop, when 2 detectives knocked on her door at 7:15 in the morning. She opened the door in the oversized cardigan, a different one, gray instead of the navy one from the apartment, but the same species of garment, and looked at the badges for a long moment before stepping back to let them in. She did not run. She did not argue. She sat down at the small kitchen table and asked if she could make coffee first. She was allowed to make the coffee. She was arrested at 7:48. Greer called Amara with the information that morning, as a professional courtesy. She was in her car in the parking lot of a grocery store when he called. She had gone out early for orange juice and had been sitting in the lot going through email before she went in. She thanked him. She put her phone in her bag. She went into the store and bought the orange juice and also a bunch of bananas because they were out. And she stood in the checkout line and felt the news settle through her. The way news settles when it has been expected long enough that the event itself lands with less force than the anticipation of it. Not satisfaction. Something quieter. The specific diminishment of a threat that has finally, after a long time of knowing it was coming, been neutralized. She drove home. She made her children breakfast. The divorce proceedings moved forward with the changed financial picture that the Meridian LLC disclosure had created. Ethan's asset base was smaller than it had appeared. The company was gone, the reserves depleted, the luxury lifestyle that had seemed so permanent revealed as being substantially leveraged against the business's cash flow. What remained was the house, their house, the the one on the tree-lined street with the kitchen where she had made eggs on New Year's morning, some personal savings, and a car. He signed over the house in April. He did it in Patricia Wen's conference room, in a meeting that lasted 22 minutes. Amara was not present for the signing. Patricia had suggested she didn't need to be, and Amara had agreed because she understood that there is a difference between needing to witness someone's loss and needing to secure your own future. And only one of those things had ever been the point. She was in a client meeting when Patricia texted her, "Signed, house is yours." She looked at the text. She pressed her thumb against the screen for a second, one small pressure, and then she set the phone face down on the conference table and said to the clients across from her, "I'm sorry. Where were we?" And they found their place in the drawings and kept going. Ethan moved into a one-bedroom apartment in the eastern part of the city, the older part, where the buildings had good bones and the rents were honest, and nobody on his floor cared about his name or what it used to be attached to. He had a bed, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, and a bookshelf he assembled himself from a flat-pack box, which took him 3 hours and left him with 4 extra screws and a residual suspicion that he had done something wrong that wouldn't manifest until the shelf collapsed at an inconvenient moment. He got a job. Not immediately. Not with his old title or in his old industry. Those doors had not slammed shut exactly, but they had closed with the particular quiet firmness of people who were happy to say they had nothing against him personally, but needed to protect their own positioning. He spent 3 weeks making calls that didn't return results, sending emails that generated polite declines, sitting with the novel experience of being a man whose professional reputation had been the primary thing he'd been proud of, and finding that reputation significantly altered. In the 5th week, Marcus called. The call was unexpected and brief. Marcus had moved quickly after the dissolution. He had retained the active projects and the key client relationships, things that were technically his to retain under the partnership agreement, and he was rebuilding under his own name. He needed a project coordinator for a mid-sized mixed-use development in the northern part of the city. Not a principal role, not the kind of title Ethan had carried for years, but real work, responsible work, the kind that required competence and reliability and showed up every day regardless of what you were feeling. "Why?" Ethan asked. "Because I know what you're capable of when you're not making bad decisions," Marcus said. "And because the alternative is watching you disappear, which I've decided I'm not willing to do." A pause. "You'd be working under me," Marcus added, not cruelly, factually. "I understand that." "You understand it now. We'll see if you still understand it in month 2 when the instinct to start redirecting things kicks in." "Marcus, I'm serious, Ethan. This is not a partnership. This is not a path back to a partnership. This is a job, and you do the job, and you earn what you earn, and we see what happens. That's all I'm offering." "That's enough," Ethan said. He started the following Monday. He wore the same kind of clothes he always wore, so he hadn't lost that instinct entirely. But the authority they'd used to signal was gone, and what was left was just a man in a button-down shirt showing up to work for another man in a smaller office than either of them had occupied 3 months ago. He made coffee in the office kitchen without being asked. He answered emails quickly. He did not offer opinions on decisions that weren't his to make. The 3rd week, Marcus gave him a problem that needed solving. A supplier issue on the Northern project, a delivery schedule that was threatening to push the timeline back by 3 weeks. Ethan spent a day on it, made 6 calls, renegotiated 2 contracts, and found a secondary supplier who could cover the gap. He left the solution on Marcus's desk in a 1-page summary and went home. Marcus called him that evening. "Good work," he said. That was all. Ethan sat at his kitchen table in his 1-bedroom apartment with his 2 salvaged chairs and his probably incorrectly assembled bookshelf, and felt something that was so unfamiliar he spent a moment trying to identify it. It was the specific and unglamorous satisfaction of having done something difficult and done it correctly. No audience. No press release. No client dinner celebrating the deal. Just a problem that had existed and now didn't exist, and the quiet that followed. He ate a sandwich he had made himself and went to bed. The children moved between 2 households the way children do, with more adaptability than their parents deserved credit for, and with a directness about their needs that left no room for adult self-pity. Maya adjusted first, in the way she adjusted to everything, by making rules. She had a system for which belongings lived where, which she enforced with an efficiency that made Amara recognize her own organizational tendencies and feel, simultaneously, proud and slightly implicated. Jonah adjusted more slowly, in the way that needed more reassurance and more repetition, and more nights when he needed someone to sit beside his bed until he fell asleep. Both parents sat beside his bed when asked. That, at least, they managed. The first time Ethan came to pick up the children from the house that was now formally, legally Amara's house, the one whose mortgage bore only her name, he stood on the front step and rang the doorbell. He had a key, still, technically. She had not asked for it back because the negotiation over the key felt smaller and more loaded than she had energy for. But he rang the doorbell. She opened it. They looked at each other for a moment. He looked better than he had in February, less hollowed, less like a man in the middle of being taken apart. He looked like a man who was in the early stages of being put back together, which was a different thing. "They're almost ready," she said. "Okay." She left the door open and went back inside. He waited on the step. Maya came barreling out with her backpack at a diagonal, and Jonah followed with his rabbit and his careful descent of the front steps, 1 foot at a time, which he had not yet outgrown. Ethan put his hand on the top of Jonah's head when the boy reached him. Just for a second. The gesture of a man relearning the language of small, ordinary things. Amara watched from the hallway. He looked up and caught her watching. Neither of them said anything. She stepped back from the door. He gathered his children and walked down the front path to his car. Not the car he'd had before, the German sedan that had represented a certain version of himself. This was a used domestic vehicle, reliable and unshowy, the kind of car chosen for what it could do rather than what it announced. He got them settled, buckled Jonah in, waited for Maya to inform him that she had done it herself, and he didn't need to check, and he drove away. Amara closed the front door. She stood in her hallway for a moment with her hand on the doorknob and the silence of a temporarily childless house settling around her. Then she went to her desk and opened her laptop and worked for 4 hours without interruption, and it was the most productive 4 hours she'd had in months. Brooks Okafor Architectural Design won the Meridian Heights Commission in May. This was not the Meridian of Ethan's LLC. That name had already been dissolved and forgotten as quickly as possible by everyone involved. This was a different Meridian, a community redevelopment project in the southern corridor of the city, one of those commissions that came along rarely and meant something beyond the work itself. 14 acres, mixed-income housing, community green space, a small arts center whose design Amara had argued for passionately in the presentation because she understood, in the way she understood load and pressure, that communities need spaces where people can make things that don't have a commercial purpose. She found out on a Thursday afternoon. Her contact at the Development Authority called her directly, rather than sending the formal letter first, because he was that kind of person, and because he could hear in his own voice that he wanted to be there for the moment she heard it. She sat at her desk after the call with her hands flat on the table, not the trembling with joy version of this moment that she might have imagined years ago. Something stiller, something that had weight to it, like a foundation being poured. The specific, grounded satisfaction of a thing earned by the precise amount of work required to earn it. She called her mother. Claudette picked up before the second ring. "What happened?" "We got the Meridian Commission." A sound from her mother's end that was not entirely words. Something prior to words. Something that expressed pride in the register that transcends vocabulary. "Mama," Amara said. "I know," her mother said. "I know, baby." They stayed on the line for a while without talking much. Amara looked out her office window at the city in May light, the trees doing what trees do when spring finally commits to itself, and she let herself feel the full size of it without diminishing it or rushing past it. The formal letter arrived 2 days later. She framed it. Not immediately. It sat on her desk for 3 weeks while she was too busy actually doing the work it represented. But eventually she had it framed and hung it in the office. Not in the prominent place, not as a trophy, but on the wall beside the window where she could see it peripherally when she was working on something difficult. In June, she hired her 3rd employee. The office was a rented space in a building she had liked for years and had finally been able to justify. Good light, reasonable lease, a conference room that fit 6 people comfortably if 2 of them were willing to sit slightly sideways. Her first employee was a young architect named Desmond, who had reached out after seeing a profile of her in an industry publication that had run in March, when the Meridian bid was still in progress. Her second was an administrative coordinator named Ruth, who was in her late 50s and had the specific competence of someone who had spent 3 decades making disorganized people look organized and had decided she wanted to work for someone who actually deserved the effort. Her third was an intern from the city's architecture school, 23 years old, deeply uncertain of everything and deeply good at the things that uncertainty couldn't touch. She ran her company the way she ran her household, with precision and with more warmth than the precision initially suggested. In the third week of June, on a Wednesday that was warm enough to eat lunch outside, she was sitting on a bench near her office with a sandwich and her phone when she got a text from a number she didn't have saved. She looked at the number, didn't recognize the area code, opened it. "This is Derek Cole, Vanessa's brother. I know you don't know me. I sent you the transfer confirmation in February. I thought you deserved to know before anyone else. I also sent the documents to the auditing firm. I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you should know who." Who? She read it twice. Then she sat with it. Derek Cole. She had not known his name until this moment, had only had the supposition of his existence as the unknown number who had texted Ethan that same night. Someone who had been there for a conversation he hadn't been supposed to be part of. Someone who had made a calculation of his own. Not from altruism, probably, or not only from that. Family loyalty has complicated economics, and a sister's criminal exposure and a brother's calculation about where loyalty ends are not simple things. But whatever the motivation, the result was that he had sent the documents, and the documents had moved the timeline in a direction that had ultimately, despite the complications it introduced, landed on the right side of the truth. She typed back, "Thank you. I mean that." She didn't receive a response. She didn't expect one. She finished her sandwich. She went back inside. She spent the afternoon on the Meridian design, the art center layout specifically, the way the internal spaces related to each other, the path a person would naturally take through the building without being directed, the specific quality of light through the western windows in the late afternoon. The details that nobody would consciously notice, but that would make the difference between a building that felt like it belonged to the people using it and one that felt like it had been designed for a photograph. She was still at her desk at 6:30 when Desmond appeared in the doorway of her office with his jacket on. "You should go home," he said. "I know. Your kids are waiting." "I know, Desmond. I'm just saying." "Go home, Desmond." He went. She saved her work, closed the laptop, and gathered her things with the unhurried efficiency of a person who has made peace with the fact that the work will still be there tomorrow, and that this is, in the larger accounting, a good problem to have. Vanessa Cole's trial began in September. Amara testified on the second day. She wore a gray blazer and low heels and sat in the witness chair with her hands in her lap and answered every question with the same quality she had brought to the police conference room in February. Complete, factual, precise, nothing added, nothing withheld. The defense attorney, a trim man with a practiced skepticism, tried several approaches to suggest that her documentation had been motivated by malice toward her estranged husband rather than legitimate concern about financial crimes. "Ms. Okafor Brooks," he said, "you were going through a divorce at the time you compiled this documentation, correct?" "Yes." "And you had reason to be financially motivated to uncover irregularities in your husband's company?" "I had reason to understand the full financial picture before making legal decisions," she said. "That's different from motivation to uncover irregularities. But the documentation you compiled was ultimately used in a criminal proceeding against your husband's." "Objection," the prosecutor said. "Mr. Brooks is not on trial." Sustained. The defense attorney tried a different angle. "Ms. Okafor Brooks, you held this documentation for approximately 3 months without reporting it to authorities. Why?" She looked at him steadily. "Because I was a woman whose husband had just ended her marriage, who had 2 young children to protect, and who needed to understand what she was looking at before she put it into a world where she couldn't control what happened to it." She paused. "That's not a legal strategy. That's a mother making a careful decision." The courtroom was very quiet for a moment. The defense attorney looked at his notes. He did not ask a follow-up question on that line. Vanessa Cole was convicted on 7 counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. She was sentenced in November to 4 years, with eligibility for parole after 22 months. She sat in the courtroom for the sentencing with her hands folded on the table in front of her, and her expression doing the thing it always did, calibrated, composed, performing a version of herself she had calculated would serve her best in this specific situation. Amara was not in the courtroom for the sentencing. She had attended the trial for her testimony and for the day the verdict was read, and she had sat in the gallery and watched the word guilty land on each of the 7 counts, with the specific relief of someone who had carried something heavy for a long time and has finally been permitted to set it down. But the sentencing she left to the people whose job it was to be there for that. She had a meeting with a contractor about the Meridian site that afternoon, and the contractor's time was valuable, and the project would not build itself. The year moved forward. In October, on a Saturday afternoon when the leaves were doing what leaves do in the city in October, performing their annual act of intense, temporary color before the long gray. Amara took the children to a birthday party for the daughter of a woman she had known since Maya was in 1st grade. The party was in a backyard that had been decorated with more ambition than the weather entirely cooperated with, and there were 12 children and 4 parents and a dog that belonged to neither and had wandered in from somewhere and was making the most of the situation. Amara stood near the back fence with a cup of something warm and watched Jonah figure out the social topology of a group of children he mostly knew, the specific small negotiations of inclusion that 5-year-olds conduct with the directness of people who haven't learned to want anything other than what they actually want. Maya was near the snack table, having positioned herself there early and strategically, in the way of a child who understands resource allocation. Amara. She turned. Standing a few feet away was a man she had met once before, at this same woman's house, warming 2 years ago. Elias, she remembered, which was an unusual enough name that it had stayed. He worked in urban planning, she thought. Tall, unhurried in his movements, the kind of person who seemed to occupy the right amount of space in a room without being aware of it. Elias, she said. He looked surprised that she remembered. You have a good memory. Occupational habit. Architects remember spatial arrangements. Is a party a spatial arrangement? Every room with people in it is a spatial arrangement. He smiled. Not the party smile, not the performing sociability smile. A real one. How are you? I heard... He stopped. I'm sorry. That's a bad start to a sentence. You heard about the divorce, she said. It's fine. It's not a secret. I heard about the work, actually, he said. The Meridian Commission. I work adjacent to those projects. I'm on the city planning side. The proposal was the best thing that came through this cycle, by a margin. He paused. I'm not trying to be professionally flattering. I just mean it. She looked at him for a moment. He had the quality of someone who meant what he said because he had made the calculation at some point in his life that meaning what you said was simply more efficient. She recognized this quality because she shared it. Thank you, she said. They talked for 20 minutes about the Meridian project, the community engagement process, the integration with existing transit infrastructure, the argument she had made for the Arts Center and why she believed it was architecturally and communally necessary. He asked real questions. He pushed back on one of her answers, gently, with a specific objection rooted in his side of the work, and she thought about it and adjusted her position and said so, because she had never in her life seen the point of defending a position just because you'd stated it first. Jonah appeared at her elbow at some point, rabbit in hand, and looked at Elias with the frank assessment of a 5-year-old. Are you my mom's friend? He asked. Working on it, Elias said. Jonah considered this. Then he offered the rabbit toward Elias briefly, the gesture of a child extending trust in the only currency he fully believed in, and then took it back and wandered away toward the snack table. Elias looked at Amara. She looked at the middle distance. She felt warmth somewhere in her chest that she did not immediately analyze, because the impulse to analyze everything before allowing it was one she was trying to be more careful about. It wasn't the warmth of falling for someone. Not yet, and maybe not simply. It was the specific warmth of a person who has been very cold for a very long time, noticing that the temperature has changed. I know you're in the middle of a significant year, Elias said. I'm not trying to make it more complicated. Everything is complicated, she said. That's not a warning, it's just a fact. Okay. I make good coffee, she said. The office has a good machine. If you want to come by sometime and actually look at the meridian drawings, not as a thing to say, but if you're actually interested in the project, that would be a real conversation worth having. I'm actually interested in the project, he said. Good, she said. Then we'll do that. She did not look at him again for the rest of the party, but she was aware of him, the way you're aware of a thing that has been placed in the room and belongs there. Jonah's birthday was in December. He turned 6 on a Saturday, and because he was 6 and had the specific ambitions of a 6-year-old who had spent the preceding weeks in intensive planning, the party was dinosaur-themed and involved a cake shaped like a diplodocus and a game whose rules shifted approximately every 4 minutes based on Jonah's evolving preferences. There were 8 children, 2 sets of grandparents, Amara's mother Claudette, who had taken the train and arrived with enough food to feed 17 people, Ruth from the office, who had declared herself an honorary aunt in September and nobody had argued with, and Desmond, who had been invited by Maya in a separate unsanctioned communication that Amara had discovered too late to reverse, and Ethan. He came at 2 in the afternoon, which was when he was supposed to come, and he brought a gift that Jonah received with the full-body enthusiasm of a child who has not yet learned to modulate his emotional responses. And he sat in the chair that had been left for him at the corner of the living room without anyone having to arrange it, because the geography of the house still knew him even if the house no longer belonged to him. Claudette brought him a plate of food. She did this without commentary, without warmth exactly, but also without coldness. The neutral, considered gesture of a woman who had made a private decision about where the line was between her daughter's well-being and her own feelings, and had put the food on the right side of it. He said thank you. She nodded and went back to the kitchen. Maya interacted with him the way she had been interacting with him for months, correctly, cautiously, with the specific guardedness of a child who is still doing the math on something. She showed him her school project, a model of a city she had built from cardboard and paint, because she showed it to everyone at the party, and she was fair in her distribution of things she was proud of, even when her feelings were complicated. He looked at the model for a long time. Who lives there? He asked. Maya pointed to 2 small figures she had placed on one of the streets. Those are the architects, she said. They're the ones who decide what gets built. He looked at the figures. Then he looked at his daughter. That's right, he said. They are. After the cake, after the game whose rules had shifted 6 times, after the grandparents had gone and the friends had been collected and Jonah was sitting on the floor surrounded by the wreckage of wrapping paper and the new set of dinosaurs he was already placing into taxonomical order, Ethan found Amara in the kitchen doing the reasonable thing that people do after parties, which is attempting to restore the kitchen to a condition that suggests it is capable of being a kitchen again. He stood in the doorway. She looked up. "Let me," he said. She considered this for a moment. Then she handed him the dish towel and stepped aside, and he came into the kitchen and they worked beside each other in the particular silence of 2 people who have said everything that needed to be said and are doing something small and ordinary in the space that's left. He washed. She put things away because she knew where things went and there was no useful pretending otherwise. The water ran and the city made its sounds outside the window, and from the living room came the sound of Jonah naming his dinosaurs with the complete seriousness of a child, for whom names are the most important gift you can give a thing. "He's a good kid," Ethan said. "They both are," she said. "Yeah." He handed her a mixing bowl. "They're better than I deserved this year." She didn't argue with that. It was true, and they both knew it, and denying it would have been a lesser thing than acknowledging it. "They love you," she said instead. "That's not something you earn or lose. It's just what they feel. You don't have to deserve it. You have to show up for it." He was quiet for a moment, the water still running. "I'm trying to do that," he said. "I know you are," she said. "I can see it." She looked at him then, directly, the way she had looked at him on New Year's morning, not with warmth exactly, not with coldness, but with the specific clarity of a woman who sees what is in front of her and names it honestly. "You're different, Ethan, not fixed, not forgiven in the way you're probably hoping for, but different." He looked at the dishes in the sink. "Is different enough? For what? To be, I don't know. Someone worth knowing, someone the kids aren't going to spend 20 years in therapy trying to make sense of." "Different is the beginning," she said. "That's all beginnings are." She put the last bowl in the cabinet and folded the dish towel and set it on the counter. He turned off the water. The kitchen was clean and the birthday was over, and through the window the December light was doing its December thing, dropping early, the sky going purple and amber over the city's rooftops. From the living room, "Dad, do you want to see my dinosaurs?" Jonah's voice, clear and simple and requiring no translation. Ethan looked at Amara. She made a small gesture with her chin. "Go," it said, which was all it needed to say. He went. She heard him settle onto the living room floor, heard Jonah beginning the serious business of introduction, and she stood in her clean kitchen for a moment with her hands on the counter and listened to her son's voice telling his father the names of all the things he loved, and the city came through the window in the last of its cold December light, and the house was warm. Months passed the way months pass when you are building something real. Not fast, not dramatically, but with the specific accumulation of days that are each unremarkable and together make something that holds. In the spring, Brooks Okafor won a second major commission, a school renovation in the Western District, one of those projects that does not make the architecture journals but matters more than the ones that do, because the children who will use that building will not know its designer's name and will not need to. Amara hired 2 more people. She moved the office to a slightly larger space in the same building, 1 floor up, with windows that looked east toward the part of the city that the Meridian Project was already beginning, literally, to reshape. She and Elias had coffee in November. Then a dinner in January that they both, without discussing it, extended by an hour and a half past any reasonable endpoint, and parted from with the specific clarity of 2 people who know something is beginning and are choosing to let it begin at its own pace. I was patient in a way that had nothing to do with passivity, the patience of a person who had learned through experience what it cost to rush something that needed time. She was cautious in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She had not moved past what had happened. She had moved through it, which is a different geography. In March, she put away the document in the October folder. Not deleted. She would never delete it, because it was part of the record of her own life, and you don't delete your own record. But she moved it out of the location she had been keeping it in, the accessible location, the one she had opened and closed through the winter with the reflexive habit of someone checking a wound. She moved it into an archive folder, nested 3 levels deep, and she labeled the archive folder with the year rather than the month, and she did not open it again. She was in her office when she did this. Late afternoon, good light through the east windows. Desmond was on the phone in the conference room. Ruth was leaving for the day. She could hear the particular sound of Ruth's specific combination of keychain and tote bag and goodbye to nobody in particular that had become, without Amara having planned for it, one of the sounds that meant she was in a place she had built herself. She closed the laptop. She sat for a moment in her office in the late afternoon light with her hands in her lap, not doing anything, which was something she had to practice because doing nothing did not come naturally to her and probably never would. She thought about New Year's morning, the eggs on the stove, the sound of a car backing out of a driveway, the first call to Patricia at 9:52, the legal pad with its clean notations, the 2 small cups with cartoon animals on them, waiting to be filled with orange juice. She thought about the woman who had stood at that stove and made the choice, not in that moment, but over 3 months of careful preparation, to stop making herself smaller, to stop waiting for the recognition that was not coming from the direction she had been facing, to turn around, not in anger, but in the oldest and most difficult act of self-determination, and face her own direction. She did not think of it as winning. She had stopped thinking of it as winning sometime in the spring when she realized that the word implied a contest, and she had never been competing with Ethan for the life she wanted. She had simply been building it. The contest was always with the version of herself that had been willing to wait. That version had been necessary. She had needed to wait, to prepare, to understand the full structure before she moved. But she did not need that version anymore. Outside, the city was doing what it always did, moving, building, tearing down, rebuilding, the endless civic metabolism of a place that does not stop for individual loss or individual recovery. Somewhere in that city, Ethan Brooks was sitting across from Marcus Webb going over procurement documents for a project in the North District, doing the work with the focused steadiness of a man who has nothing left to perform. Somewhere in it, Maya was in her room assembling a model, a new one, more ambitious than the last, and Jonah was probably still talking to his dinosaurs, because some things persist. Somewhere in it, the Meridian site was being broken ground, The first physical alteration of a place that would become, when it was done, exactly what she had drawn. A space where people could live and make things and stand in the right quality of late afternoon light and feel, without anyone telling them to, that they belonged. She picked up her phone. She texted Elias, "I'm leaving the office early. There's a section of the Meridian site I want to show you, if you're free." The response came in under a minute. "I'm free." She put on her coat. She turned off the office light. She walked down the stairs and through the building's lobby and out into the spring afternoon, into the city that was hers, the way cities belong to the people who love them enough to try to make them better. She did not look back at the building. She already knew where everything was. The strongest woman she would ever need had been inside her all along, and she had known it, in the deepest and least dramatic part of herself. Since the morning she had turned from the stove with a spatula in her hand and looked at her husband and understood, with the absolute clarity of a structure finally showing its true load-bearing capacity, that she was not going to break. She had just been waiting for permission to stop pretending she might. She didn't need the permission anymore. She walked into the spring light and did not stop.